traditions as well, that there be deep, civilizational, if you will. I'm using that word in a little bit different way. There's that civilizational, if you will, connections that unite all of us, and that is the real fault line. That the real fault line is not between an English and a Welsh a citizen, but the real fault line is between a Muslim and a white man, and that race is the point and not ethnicity, and that doesn't, again, this is not some autistic mathematics problem where if we start to overcome ethnicity, then race will also vanish as well. It doesn't necessarily work like that. But historically speaking, where we are right now, race is the fundamental divide. When a Syrian refugee enters Europe, he doesn't say, this is Norwegian. He's a Norwegian, remember. Unlike the French or the English, they never had imperial ambitions in my part of the world. So I have a totally different perspective. No, he doesn't think in that way. The Syrian refugee recognizes a Norwegian as a white man in the same way that he recognizes an Italian or an Englishman or a Russian. Race is the fault line. Civilization, in the way that I use that term, is the fault line. These deep aspects of who we are, these bigger foundational aspects, I guess. And so I think that is also how we need to think about ourselves, both politically and geopolitically. Okay, but that's a huge issue, and it's certainly worth discussing. How exactly ethno-nationalism is going to interact with this international brotherhood that I'm promoting? That's a question that hasn't been definitively answered.
That is something I could go off on for a while, but we have other donors, and I want to get to them because they did pay us. For Fourth Reich for $5, I've seen his name floating around. Thanks so much, buddy. Any thoughts on the hashtag #MyWhitePrivilege, which was trending on Twitter? Trolls versus self-loathing liberals were battling it out. Well, I was trying to push hashtag #MyJewishPrivilege and #MyAsianPrivilege.
Yeah, clearly those things exist. My cultural privilege, that also exists. If you're above a 6 and you're female, you can say pretty much anything people say to you. But obviously there's obviously Jewish privilege. And my perspective on this, I was actually interviewed in 2016 with someone who said, what do you think about white privilege? And I said, I think it's a great thing. I think we should try to expand white privilege and keep it. And what I mean by that is that, look, at some level, everyone's privileged in the sense that we all come from somewhere. We think about white privilege as this, hoity-toity wasp, elite that someone's a part of, and basically everything's just handed to them. They get into university. Everything, the world is set out for them. But, look, you have privilege as a Hispanic immigrant in the sense that you have a community that I don't have access to, that actually can be greatly beneficial to you. Certainly, there is Jewish privilege in the sense that you have access to communities, you have access to political organizations, civic organizations that I don't have access to. There are these networks that exist, and so these are real things. I don't really like it when conservatives try to deconstruct white privilege and say, oh well, we're all just individuals or whatever. We all pull ourselves up in the bootstraps. I think that's obviously incorrect, and that's obviously not what we want. We want white privilege in the sense that we want there to be we want to help our fellow people. We ultimately need elites. Every society is always good to have elites. And what I said about things deepening and expanding it is the sense that as opposed to hoity-toity wasps just helping out their kids, we should actually start caring more about whites in Appalachia suffering from the opioid epidemic. I'm kind of engaging in stereotypes there, but you understand what I'm saying. We actually want to start promoting these things, about caring about our fellow people, as opposed to thinking of everyone as individuals. And if you're some one of those whites on meth who, going to commit suicide, well, sucks to be you. You're not as smart and savvy as I am, so to hell with you. No, I don't think we should think like that at all. I think that's anti. Not only is it just immoral and kind of shocking, but it's just anti-human. Anyway. So yeah, I think as opposed to deconstructing white privilege in this kind of conservative way, I think we should embrace it and say, yeah, white privilege exists. It's good. It's something that is natural. It's always going to be there, and we should actually try to deepen it. And we should also recognize the privilege of other people. But again, whites we are the most moralist race, and we just we these liberals denouncing themselves and humble bragging. It's bizarre. I did see that hashtag. It is absolutely bizarre. It is funny as well how the left has kind of gone away from thinking about class and thinking about how can we build it? How can we have a government that helps out these people who are suffering economically? That they basically abandoned that in favor of this just kind of weird and emotional, advancements where, a transsexual 8-year-old is so brave that, this is the latest frontier of progress. And they do this while abandoning the kinds of things that the left traditionally cared about, and which they cared about for good reason. Class issues, the ability to have, the ability to afford a family, the ability to have some kind of stability when it comes to work, and so on. They've abandoned that, and they've embraced just all this just absolute emotional silliness.
One last one. This is Nazbol NRX for $31.82. What books are you two currently reading? Hail Spencer.
Thank you. I am reading. I'm rereading Charles Murray's book on UBI, and I'm reading a very good book by, I believe his name is Fahrenkopf, I can't remember exactly. It starts with an F. He has written this kind of biographical and historical introduction or explanation of Spengler. So it's a readable book. It's very well done. It's academic but not dry or tedious. And it's just on Spengler. He goes into his life and history, but he also offers sound explanations of Spengler. So I'm kind of reading that in my kind of to get my philosophical juices flowing, and then I'm writing some stuff on UBI. So I'm actually was rereading some of Charles Murray's book, which is called In Our Hands, which is a very good book on UBI, Universal Basic Income.
Yeah, since this question was partially for me, I've been reading a lot of essays for school. That's mostly what I read. Most recently, I've read Nicholas Kreisler, I believe his name is. He was an Austrian soldier during World War I. I read his essay, his autobiographical account of the war. That was very interesting. And how just like the different races of people actually came together at different points during World War I. I thought that was really powerful. And secondly, I read the Christian-Muslim debate. I believe that's either fictional or they can't really tell where that originated, but that was a sort of a propaganda piece for the Christians to debate Muslims back in the Middle Ages. That was interesting. So that's what I've read, and more recently,
I've never heard of that. What was that? It was like a dialogue.
It was somewhat of a dialogue, but they found it in like an old document that the Christians would use to debate the Muslims back in the Middle Ages, and the Arabic prince. Some of you probably have read this. There's an Arabic prince that had a Greek mother, so he allowed the Christian to debate a Muslim, because he had a foot in both camps. So he decided to let the the Christian debate the Muslim in his court, and it was an interesting debate because you saw, because Islam was relatively new to the world back then, and Christianity was newer, so you could see a lot of similarities between the two faiths. It was a pretty interesting read.
I think it's interesting. Which language is that written in? Is that written in Latin?
I would have to look at the document again. I just know the title of it is a Christian Muslim debate, and I forgot who the author was, but I can post that in the side chat if you're interested in it. That said, those are the super chats for the time being. If you'd like to donate, remember, log into Streamlabs or use our TipeeeStream account. So we were talking about, before the super chats, we were talking about Mark Zuckerberg. I know there are a few new listeners. We're talking about Mark Zuckerberg and essentially why he might want a regulated internet. And from a business perspective, you could certainly imagine why. It'd be more stable, easy to tell, and it's expensive hiring hundreds of moderators to comb through the internet, especially of a site like his, which has 1 billion users. But another reason why he might be calling for this, especially recently, was another article I found when I was prepping the show. This is from The Sun, which is also the same piece, same outlet that wrote the last article that we commented on. It was tech. Yeah, so the title is Tech Titan Takedown. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube execs face jail and multi-billion-pound fines over terror videos.
Right. Yeah, I did find this absolutely amazing. I guess there's a lot of aspects to this, but yeah, I mean, this is where the government already views Silicon Valley products as the public square, and yeah, the fact that they would jail a moderator for not taking something down is remarkable. Yeah, I mean, I can. There was an interest. The terror video is also very interesting because, it's. I think what is her name? Sheryl Sandberg was talking about how we were able to crack down against ISIS, and now we need to crack down against white nationalism. We are able to solve this problem. Very, very ominous. But I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of this is coming from the New Zealand shooter. Because that, again, it was difficult to come by his manifesto. I understand why the actual video that he made, if that video is legitimate, is something that should be censored to some degree. I mean, it is a snuff video in some ways. It's showing murder. I mean, it's absolutely shocking. But at the same time, I mean, I think that whenever an act like this happens, we should really want to learn why it happened. That we owe these people a fair trial legally, and I don't know if we owe them. I don't know if we exactly morally owe them the idea that we should learn about them, but I think just from the perspective of a serious person who doesn't want violence in our country or any country, who wants to try to understand this phenomenon, we kind of owe it to ourselves to look into it seriously. And yet, again, the shooter's manifesto was widely censored. I think the opposite should be the case. I think that manifesto he wrote was readable. It was not insane nonsense. It was not a bomb-making kit. No, it was his philosophical statement, you could say. And I think any serious person who cares about this issue should want to learn about him and say, why did he do this? How did he view the world? And in some ways, or many ways, what he was saying was quite powerful. This is the New Zealand shooter. What was his name? Trenton Terrence. Yeah. He was basically saying that I don't feel that any democratic political solution is possible because we are being suppressed, we don't have a voice, and therefore I am turning to violence. And that is actually a very serious thing that all citizens should think about, and I think that certainly the establishment should think about. If the system keeps oppressing real, reasonable, non-violent voices for white identity, then we are going to have more people come to the conclusion that, oh, we just simply need to engage in violence. If we don't have a seat at the table, if you know, Jared Taylor's stuff, if my stuff, if some YouTube stream of shitlords, if that is viewed as just inherently wicked and it should just be destroyed, taken out of the public square in general, then what is going to happen is that those root ideas are not going to go away. They're simply going to be expressed in terrible, violent manners. And this is something the establishment needs to seriously think about. I think I said in the other, on an earlier version of this, I think the first time that Craig Ainsley and I did this, did this show, I said, in a way, it's either him or me, in the sense that you're either going to recognize serious voices for white identity, or you are going to have desperate people engage in violence. That if you suppress people like me, the ideas are not going to go away. They're simply going to be expressed in terrible forms that we all want to avoid. And again, the establishment, media companies, etc., need to think seriously about it. I would absolutely never engage in violence, even if I'm totally being kicked off all platforms and so on, because that's not who I am. But again, there are going to be other people who reach a state of desperation and say, there's nothing we can do. We can't engage in this process. Whereas if we're allowed to engage in this process, if we're allowed to put forth our ideas, if we're treated as citizens and not as heretics who deserve to be destroyed, then we can actually come to an understanding.
I do agree with you, and I think we've talked this subject to death, so I think we should probably get to our next one, which is SPLC. Yeah, let's go over that because there's rather interesting developments there as normal. Famous civil rights group suffers from systematic culture of racism and sexism, staffers say. This is by Nick Valencia and Pamela Kirkland at CNN.
Yeah, it's just funny to read headlines like that. I think so much of the left, it is kind of eating itself, and we're seeing some of this. I do find it interesting as well of the Me Too movement kind of destroying liberals who wanted to benefit from it, and who supported it and promoted it and all this kind of stuff. Joe, I think there was a horrifying testimony from one who said that Joe Biden forcefully kissed her head or something. Now, I will admit that Joe Biden is a bit creepy. There's some videos of them with girls and other women. Yeah, the guy is gross. But at the same time, this idea that liberals are now actually really paying the price, and that they're getting Me Too for things that are not criminal in my mind, is rather amusing. And I think you can kind of see this for the SPLC itself. Now, I don't know what's going on with the SPLC, and the SPLC has been able to lock down a lot of these claims. The SPLC's founder and someone who is, he's the Pope of that church, Morris Dees, he was forced to leave the organization. That's something I never could have imagined seeing. He is so important. It's like, you know, the Chicago Bulls firing Michael Jordan or something. I mean, it was bizarre. And then also, I believe his name is Richard Cullen, was forced to resign. He's someone who's been on television a lot. He is, you know, he was a major figure. He's also left. And then there are these murmurings coming. There was one
play for it.
Staffer there who's claiming that yes, white people are being promoted and so on. It's this, you know, interesting situation.
Really bad poker player who has a 10.
You know, a highly educated. You know, again, let me preface. I don't know what's going on, but this is at least what I'm gathering from reports and allegations is that you have a highly educated, privileged whites and Jews who are in part of this organization that is extremely morally signaling, and that they are kind of promoting themselves. But at the end of the day, they ultimately have to adhere to their own logic, and their own logic is going to call for more diversity, for more gender and racial and sexual diversity at their workplace, and they're going to have to face these problems. I think so many whites, upper level whites, feel that like they can benefit from the diversity mandates, that they can become the human resources manager, or that you know they can be viewed as the good white, you know, supports all this stuff. But at some level, you know, the diversity of people, you know, come after them, and so yeah, I mean, institutions across the board are being, you know, transformed, and the SPLC won't be immune to this logic. You know, I don't know. I mean, I almost feel sorry for them. No, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's really telling because, you know, they this whole Me Too thing has primarily affected liberals, at least from my perspective, because they don't, these women and the, you know, minorities even that are saying that they were passed up, they're not interacting with, you know, straight white conservative men. They interact and work with liberal whites. And so they're going to be the target of it because, you know, they're the white people that they actually see and work with. So that's why they're facing the brunt of it.
Yeah, and they don't have any defense. I mean, that's the kind of thing where white. It's interesting. Whites have kind of unilaterally disarmed in this diversity battle, and we're seeing the consequences of that. You know, it's funny. Bear with me while I go down this road, but I did a video on this many years ago. I think it was 2013, but it was when this film called World War Z was released. It was starring Brad Pitt, and it was based on a book by Mel Brooks' son, I believe. But anyway, the movie was not like the book. It was about zombies, but anyway, it was this international zombie attack. Zombie apocalypse on a global scale. It was not a bad film from the entertainment perspective. There are these crazy images of like mountains of zombies, mountains of humanity climbing over the walls of Israel. It was interesting, to say the least. But one of the aspects of it in the third act of the film was that in the world of this movie, zombies didn't attack you if you were sick. So they didn't attack you if you were already, you know, deeply weak, like you were suffering from cancer or AIDS or some disease or something like that. And so the way that Brad Pitt escapes is that he injects a disease into himself, and then he's viewed by the zombies as in a way weak. And I thought this was again, bear with me here. I thought this was kind of a fascinating, maybe probably unconscious or unintentional metaphor for how whites interact in this world. Because the whole movie was about, in some ways, angst of And I think it was actually an expression of immigration and racial angst. The fact that one of the most memorable scenes of that film is Israel being attacked, Israel's walls being overrun with millions of zombies. I mean, it was hard not to see that as a kind of immigration metaphor. And it was interesting that the film presented weakness as the solution. So basically, what you did is that you would give yourself cancer or give yourself disease, and then the zombies wouldn't kill you. It was almost like the white negotiation strategy, which is, oh, I love diversity. I would never conceivably be white nationalist. I'm just totally weak, and I'm an absolute pushover. See this gun I have here? I'm unloading it. I'm breaking it and throwing away the ammunition. I am totally weak, and this was the negotiation strategy of whites that they thought that they could win. So, to become like Justin Trudeau, to be weak is to win. To let your enemy be victorious is the ultimate victory. Is Trudeau logic. And I think that film was a kind of unconscious metaphor for how upper level whites act. And at some level, it doesn't work. At some level, even if you've injected yourself with all this weakness and silliness, the zombies are going to eat you nonetheless.
Well, I think it's sort of an ironic twist that this could be made as a metaphor for a white guilt, and even they know that it's cancer because that's what it's analogous to. And
that is funny. It's almost like that film is very. I should write an article on this film because it's actually a fascinating. This was a film that went through all of these reshoots, and so I think the original third act of the film was that the Brad Pitt and company would go to Russia, and then the Russians were victorious because they were fighting the zombies in the bitter cold of Siberia or something. Or actually, it was in Red Square. They were fighting the zombies in Red Square, and it was so cold that the zombies would freeze, and then you could kill them. But I think in a way that, which sounds like an amazing scene. I mean, I want to see that, that alternative cut of World War Z. Much like I want to see the Snyder cut and of Justice League. But anyway, but I wonder if the filmmakers found that too nationalistic or too pro-Russian, too badass in a way. And they did these massive reshoots, and they made the film much kind of smaller, but in this kind of funny way, as you're intimating, is that you inject yourself with guilt, but it's ultimately cancer. You're going to die from it, or at some level the zombies won't care and they'll eat you anyway. Like all of this moral signaling and not my white privilege or whatever. Or, I'm going to become the human resources manager of diversity. I'm a good white. At the end of the day, even the people who promote this recognize it for what it is. It is cancer. It is a disease, and it's going to eat away from you and at you and ultimately kill you. Fascinating.
Oh, yeah, it is very, very fascinating.
I think you're going to watch this film again and probably write on it. I don't want anyone to steal my interpretation. Mine's fairly unique, but it's worth talking about. I do think this is a really interesting metaphor that film.
Absolutely. Well, there are a few more topics. I mean, this SPLC thing, it can go on for a while. It just goes into how African Americans were passed up to for promotions, and they were tired of seeing the per se basis calls. I mean, employees came forward. This wasn't just something like people who worked there and staffers said that they feel divided, and it's just a mess, and the organization seems to be going through major issues. It does have hundreds of millions of dollars at its disposal. I mean, it could recover from this if it really needs to, but who knows? We'll have to see what happens there.
Oh yeah, I mean the SPLC is not going away, and yeah, they have do they have $1 billion in the bank? They have a lot of money. I'll have to go look at that. They have hundreds of billions. They have the amount of capital that, some smallish hedge fund, possesses. I mean, they're not going under. But it is just interesting that it is, being torn apart by its own logic in a way. And it's not being attacked for the reasons that people should criticize the SPLC. It's being attacked, using its own morality and metaphors. So I think that's, I don't know, just desserts, you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing that I think we could go into that had to do with the platforming issue is Amazon. Amazon will pay $0 in taxes on $11 billion in profit for 2018.
Yeah, first off, we should mention how they're accomplishing this. I have not looked into this myself in detail, but I have read a little bit of some articles on this. The way that Amazon is accomplishing this is that Amazon is remarkably profitless. So basically, all of these profits that it makes from selling books, its original business, to selling just all sorts of things, home supplies, food now with Whole Foods, whatever, what it makes from streaming video, which is its new thing, streaming music. It is basically, it puts all of that money into infrastructure. And so Amazon was this kind of amazing corporation that was not profiting. It had huge stock market valuations. So companies like Apple and Microsoft, they have huge profits, great margins, and they store that money overseas or whatever. Amazon had this interesting model where, obviously Bezos was getting paid, top level people were getting paid, but they were pushing down wages and just investing all of the profits into new infrastructure. And this allowed it to have huge stock valuations while having zero profits. And I presume that's how they're getting away with paying taxes. But look, any normal person looks at that and says, this is absolutely fraudulent. As in the words of George Buffett, George Buffett said, my secretary is paying a higher tax rate than I am. This is unfair. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that. I don't support George Buffett's tax proposals, but they're clearly, if you are that big, you can hire the right people to create the right, wealth and tax model where you are effectively paying your taxes. GE is another company that's getting away with this. I mean, any normal person looks at that and says, this is privilege, this is fraud. But it's also interesting because it does relate back to deplatforming. I mean, Amazon is a platform, just like Twitter and so on. It's less of a bookstore than it is a platform. When Amazon first came on the scene in the late 90s, early 2000s, I remember it was a bookstore. It was not, it was a small percentage. It was not dominating. It was just a kind of interesting new way to get books. It was great in the sense that you could find more marginal books that wouldn't be supplied at your local store or even at Barnes and Noble or Borders, when these, Borders has come under a few years ago. But now I think Amazon is something different than a bookstore. I think it is a platform. If your book does not show up on Amazon, it might as well not exist. Much like if your website doesn't show up on Google, it effectively doesn't exist. Google is the plumbing of the web, and Amazon is the plumbing of publishing. And we've seen this. Jared Taylor's book, White Identity, was taken off. Greg Johnson's, many of his books were taken off. I tweeted out something this morning, a book that I actually contributed to called A Fair, very ironic, it's called A Fair Hearing. And it's a book by a lot of many alt-right people, including myself, Daniel Freeberg, Jared, I think, has an article, some other people. And it's basically our explanation for how we think and what we believe. my article on football was actually in there. And so it was kind of like, this is my perspective on sports. And anyway, the fact that they would take off, it would ban a book called A Fair Hearing is pretty morbidly funny, you could say. But yeah, I mean, this nut also has to be cracked. Amazon isn't a bookstore, it's a platform, and it should be regulated like that. You can still buy bomb making, the Anarchist Cookbook, you can buy it on an Amazon. You can buy all sorts of things that are pretty outrageous on Amazon. But you can't read, this book that includes my essay in it. You can't read Jared Taylor's book. Washington some of publishers and Radix, we have produced a number of volumes, more than a dozen, and but these books don't have the kind of, you could say, immediate, somewhat salacious titles. They aren't a book like the White Nationalist Manifesto or White Identity, which is Jared Taylor's book. They'll have books like The Great Purge, The Deformation of the Conservative Movement. Just because I was, it wasn't even so much of a strategy. I was basically just, or it wasn't so much a strategy for to misrepresent myself or someone. It was just that I wanted to publish books that were a little bit off the beaten track. More, let's do an intellectual history of conservatism, etc. And we published actually Sam Francis's magnum opus called Leviathan on class in the 20th and 21st century. Will these books start to be taken down just because my hand is in them? I mean, it's an interesting question. My guess is that it's going to take a little more time, but they will. We know where the arrows, and again, much like Twitter, much like PayPal, Stripe, Amazon is a platform, and we need to solve this problem. We need to solve it on a global level. I would almost rather that we all get banned in toto than there's this ambiguity, because ambiguity has a real chilling effect where a content creator, we're afraid to create content because we're not sure. We're saying, well, Amazon's the platform for selling books. So, but am I going to get banned? Should I put it up there? Am I going to put all this work in? And then that chilling effect is terrible. So I would almost rather that we just get banned in toto, and therefore we can say, okay, we're all going to this new platform, which is an alt-free speech platform. That would be better than ambiguity. But obviously, the best situation, which I would prefer, is that Amazon changes its policies or Amazon is regulated by the government. And so unless you are putting forth material that is, pornographic or criminal in the sense of like a bomb-making kit or something, that everyone should have the ability to put forth their material on Amazon. And this is something that makes sense in the digital age. For a local bookstore, it is outrageous to claim that they must carry every book. No, this local bookstore can't carry 1 billion books or something. It's obviously outrageous. But in the digital age, Amazon can't do that. That is not outrageous. In the digital age, you can have one bit of code on a server and it can be reproduced infinitely. So I don't think it's outrageous for Amazon to be treated as a platform. And this is the future that would be better for us. I would much prefer that. But again, I would almost prefer just an outright ban than this ambiguous situation. I remember the first time Amazon started really cracking down on political speech was after the Dylan Roof situation. And so Dylan Roof was a deeply disturbed young man, and he attacked a church and killed innocent people. It was an absolute outrage. And the system, the mass media, they were kind of toying with what narrative they're going to choose. So first it was the gun control narrative, and then maybe the incel narrative or something like that. So they settled on the Confederate flag narrative. And so, a days after that terrible event, Confederate flags were taken down in states. And on Amazon, Confederate flag material was taken down. So people were selling Confederate flags. Well, the fact is, why can't you buy a Confederate flag? I mean, you can hate the Confederacy. Why can't you buy it? But Amazon was even cracking down on historical accounts of the Civil War that had a Confederate flag on the cover. Like if you're going to write a history